The Secret Teaching of the Kybalion. Brought to you by Hyptoria. The gateway opens. In the shadows of history, long before the great libraries of Alexandria burned, and before the marble columns of Athens crumbled to dust, there existed a tradition of knowledge so profound that it shaped the thinking of every philosopher, mystic, and seeker who encountered it. This wisdom emerged from the land where the Nile flows through golden sands, carrying with it secrets that would echo through the corridors of time. The ancient masters who preserved this knowledge understood something that modern seekers often forget. Truth is not complex, but simple. It is not hidden in elaborate rituals or cryptic symbols, but woven into the very fabric of existence itself. They recognize that the universe operates according to unchanging principles, and that anyone who truly comprehends these principles holds the key to understanding both the world around them and the world within them. This is not a book of empty promises or fantastic claims. It is an invitation to explore ideas that have stood the test of millennia, ideas that reveal why some people seem to effortlessly create the life they desire, while others struggle against invisible currents. These teachings have been whispered in temple halls, discussed in secret societies, and passed down through generations of those who recognize their transformative power. The wisdom contained in these pages has influenced every major philosophical and spiritual tradition that followed. You will find its echoes in the teachings of the Stoics, the insights of the mystics, and the discoveries of those who pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Yet for too long, this knowledge has been wrapped in language that obscures rather than illuminates, presented in ways that intimidate rather than inspire. What you are about to discover is both ancient and eternally relevant. These principles operate whether you believe in them or not, whether you understand them or not, just as gravity affects you regardless of your knowledge of physics. But when you do understand them, when you truly grasp how they work, you begin to see the world with different eyes. You start to recognize patterns that were always there but previously invisible. You begin to understand why things happen as they do, and more importantly, how you can work with these natural laws rather than against them. The journey we're about to take together will challenge some of your assumptions about reality. It will invite you to consider possibilities that may initially seem strange or impossible. But if you approach these ideas with an open mind, and a willingness to test them against your own experience, you may discover that they offer practical insights that can transform not just how you think, but how you live, the foundation of all mystery. Deep within the heart of every ancient teaching lies a recognition that has puzzled and inspired humanity since we first gazed up at the stars and wondered about our place in the cosmos. This recognition is both startling in its simplicity and profound in its implications. Everything that exists, everything that has ever existed, and everything that will ever exist, springs from a single unified source. The ancient masters called this source by many names, but names are merely fingers pointing at the moon. What matters is not what we call it, but what we understand about its nature. This source is not separate from creation, watching from some distant throne. It is creation itself, expressing through infinite forms and manifestations, yet remaining fundamentally whole and undivided. Imagine, if you will, an ocean that is so vast that it has no shores. Within this ocean, waves rise and fall, each wave appearing to be separate and distinct. Some waves are large and powerful, others small and gentle. Some last for moments, others seem to endure for ages. Yet every wave, no matter how different it may appear, is simply the ocean expressing itself. The wave is not separate from the ocean, and the ocean is not diminished by the countless waves that dance upon its surface. This is the first great truth that unlocks all others. You are not separate from the source of all existence. You are that source, expressing itself as you. Your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, your very sense of being an individual self, all arise within this infinite consciousness, like waves upon the cosmic ocean. This understanding immediately transforms how we see ourselves and our relationship to the world. If everything is fundamentally one consciousness appearing as many, then the boundaries we perceive between self and other, between inner and outer, between subject and object, are not as solid as they appear. They are more like the imaginary lines that divide countries on a map, useful for certain purposes, but having no ultimate reality. When you truly grasp this principle, you begin to understand why the ancient masters spoke of sympathy and connection between all things. It is not that separate things influence each other across empty space, but that there are no truly separate things. What appears as influence or connection is simply the one consciousness recognizing itself in all its forms. This recognition also explains why your mental states and inner conditions seem to be reflected in your outer circumstances. It is not magic or wishful thinking, but the natural operation of a universe where consciousness is primary and matter is secondary. Your individual awareness is like a localized intensity within the universal field of consciousness, and this localization naturally expresses itself through the circumstances, relationships, and experiences that surround you. The implications of this understanding are staggering. If the entire universe is fundamentally mental in nature, if all existence is consciousness appearing as the world, then by changing your consciousness, you change your world. This is not metaphor or poetry, but the recognition of how reality actually works. Yet this power comes with profound responsibility. Once you understand that your thoughts and mental states are not private events happening inside your head, but forces that shape the very fabric of your experience, you can no longer afford to be casual about what goes on in your mind. Every thought becomes a seed, every emotion a creative force, every belief a boundary that defines what is possible for you. The dance of opposites. Walk through any garden in spring, and you will witness one of the most fundamental mysteries of existence. Where once there was only a seed, seemingly lifeless and inert, now grows a vibrant plant reaching toward the sun. The seed had to cease being a seed for the plant to emerge, yet the plant carries within it the essence of what the seed contained. This is polarity in action, the eternal dance between what appears to be opposite, but is actually complementary. The ancients understood that what we call opposites are really two ends of the same stick, two aspects of a single reality. Hot and cold are not different things, but different degrees of temperature. Love and hate are not separate emotions, but varying intensities of caring. Success and failure are not fixed states, but different positions along the spectrum of achievement. Rich and poor, happy and sad, courage and fear, all are points on a continuum rather than separate territories. This insight revolutionizes how we approach the challenges and difficulties of life. Instead of seeing problems as obstacles to be conquered or enemies to be defeated, we begin to recognize them as the other pole of the solutions we seek. The very existence of a problem implies the existence of its resolution, just as the existence of darkness implies light, and the existence of questions implies answers. Consider how this principle operates in your own experience. When you feel lost, you are simultaneously creating the capacity to be found. When you experience confusion, you are developing the very faculties that will bring clarity. When you face fear, you are building the foundation for courage. The challenge is not to eliminate one pole in favor of the other, but to understand how they work together to create the full spectrum of human experience. This understanding brings tremendous freedom because it shows us that we are never truly stuck in any condition. No matter how fixed or permanent a situation may appear, it contains within itself the seeds of its transformation. The key is learning to recognize the inherent fluidity in what seems solid, the potential for change within what appears unchangeable. The masters taught that everything flows from one pole toward the other, in endless cycles. Day becomes night becomes day. Youth becomes age becomes youth again, through the birth of new generations. Civilizations rise and fall. Personal fortunes ebb and flow. Moods shift from high to low and back again. Understanding this natural rhythm allows us to work with these cycles rather than resist them. When you are experiencing the challenging pole of any situation, instead of fighting against it or trying to force your way to the opposite extreme, you can recognize that this pole contains the very energy that will eventually swing toward its complement. The depth of your challenges often corresponds to the height of the achievements that follow. The darkness before dawn is often the deepest, not because the situation is hopeless, but because dawn is near. More importantly, you can learn to consciously shift your position along any polarity. Since hot and cold are degrees of the same phenomenon, you can gradually increase the temperature of your experience. Since love and indifference are points on the spectrum of caring, you can consciously move toward greater love. Since confidence and doubt are variations of the same mental energy, you can learn to transmute doubt into confidence by understanding their underlying unity. This transmutation is not about denying or suppressing the unwanted pole, but about recognizing the energy that manifests as both poles, and learning to direct that energy toward the expression you prefer. Fear and courage use the same energy, the same heightened awareness, the same intensity of focus. The difference lies in the direction of that energy. When you understand this, you can begin to redirect the energy of fear into the energy of courage, not by fighting the fear, but by recognizing the power it contains and choosing how to express that power. The practical applications of this principle extend into every area of life. In relationships, instead of trying to eliminate conflict, you learn to see it as the creative tension that can deepen understanding and intimacy. In career challenges, instead of seeing obstacles as problems, you recognize them as the very forces that will build your capacity for greater success. In personal growth, instead of trying to eliminate your weaknesses, you learn to see them as strengths that have not yet found their proper expression. The rhythm of all life. If you have ever sat by the ocean and watched the waves roll endlessly toward the shore, you have witnessed one of the most perfect demonstrations of how the universe operates. Each wave follows the one before it, with mathematical precision, neither hurrying nor delaying, each containing the perfect amount of energy for its journey from horizon to sand. The ocean teaches us something profound about the nature of existence. Everything moves according to rhythm, according to cycles that are as reliable as they are invisible. This rhythmic nature of reality extends far beyond the obvious cycles of day and night, seasons and tides. It governs the beating of your heart, the electrical patterns of your brain, the rise and fall of your moods, the expansion and contraction of your social circles, the periods of activity and rest in your creative work. Even your thoughts follow rhythmic patterns, flowing like rivers of consciousness that speed up and slow down, according to natural cycles. Understanding rhythm changes everything about how you approach life. Instead of expecting constant progress in a straight line, you begin to appreciate the wisdom of natural cycles. You learn to recognize when it is time to push forward with great energy, and when it is time to rest and consolidate your gains. You discover that failure to honor these natural rhythms leads to exhaustion and burnout, while working in harmony with them multiplies your effectiveness. The ancient masters observed that every action generates a reaction, not just once but in a continuing wave that eventually returns to its source. This is not karma in some mystical sense, but the simple recognition that the universe operates like a vast echo chamber, where every thought, word and deed sends out vibrations that must eventually complete their cycle by returning home. This return is not always immediate or obvious. Sometimes the rhythm operates over long periods, so long that we lose sight of the connection between cause and effect. But the connection is always there, as reliable as the return of spring after winter, as certain as the tide that goes out returning to fill the bay. When you truly understand rhythm, you develop what might be called cosmic patience. You learn to plant seeds without demanding immediate harvest, knowing that the cycle will complete itself in perfect timing. You learn to endure difficult periods without despair, recognizing them as necessary parts of a larger pattern that is moving toward resolution. You learn to enjoy successful periods without attachment, understanding that they too are part of a cycle that will evolve into new forms. This principle also teaches the art of timing. Just as a surfer learns to read the waves and catch them at the perfect moment, you can learn to read the rhythms in your own life and in the world around you. There are times when the energy is building, when new ventures will be supported by the natural flow. There are times when the energy is consolidating, when it is wiser to strengthen what already exists rather than launch new initiatives. The rhythm of your personal cycles becomes particularly important to understand. You have daily rhythms that govern your energy, creativity, and social capacity. You have weekly rhythms, monthly rhythms, seasonal rhythms, and longer cycles that span years or even decades. When you align your activities with these natural rhythms, rather than fighting against them, you discover that life becomes both easier and more productive. Pay attention to your own patterns. Notice when your creative energy is naturally highest, and protect those times for your most important work. Observe when you naturally crave solitude, and when you hunger for social connection. Recognize the seasons of your ambition and the seasons of your contentment. By honoring these rhythms, you stop forcing yourself to be productive when rest is needed, and stop resting when action is called for. The principle of rhythm also reveals why moderation and balance are so highly valued in wisdom traditions. When you swing too far toward any extreme, the natural rhythm of the universe will eventually swing you back toward the other pole, often with force proportional to how far you have gone from center. This is not punishment, but simply the restoration of equilibrium. However, understanding rhythm gives you a remarkable power, the ability to escape the automatic swing of the pendulum through conscious choice. While you cannot stop the rhythms of the universe, you can rise above their automatic influence on your consciousness. When external circumstances swing toward the challenging pole, you can maintain your inner equilibrium. When the winds of change blow through your life, You can be like a mountain that remains unmoved while clouds pass over its peaks. This mastery comes not from resisting rhythm, but from identifying with the consciousness that observes rhythm, rather than the experiences that are rhythmical. Your true nature is not the wave that rises and falls, but the ocean that remains constant through all waves. When you rest in this deeper identity, you can experience the full spectrum of life's rhythms without being thrown off balance by them. The web of infinite connection. Imagine dropping a pebble into a perfectly still pond. The rings spread outward from the point of impact, growing larger as they travel, eventually reaching the farthest shores. Now imagine that every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every action you take is like that pebble, creating ripples that spread through the invisible medium of consciousness, touching everything in ways both subtle and profound. This is not poetry or metaphor, but a recognition of how reality actually functions. In a universe where everything emerges from a single source, nothing exists in isolation. Every part is connected to every other part through the fundamental unity that underlies all apparent diversity. What affects one affects all, though the connections may be so subtle that we overlook them. The ancients called this the principle of correspondence, recognizing that patterns repeat at every level of existence. The same forces that govern the movement of planets also govern the circulation of blood in your body. The same principles that create harmony in music also create harmony in relationships. The same laws that determine the growth of crystals also determine the development of ideas in your mind. This correspondence reveals something remarkable. By understanding any part of the universe deeply, you gain insight into the whole. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. What is true in the large is true in the small. The patterns in your personal life mirror the patterns in the world around you, and the patterns in the world around you mirror the patterns in the cosmos itself. This principle transforms how you approach both self-understanding and world-understanding. Instead of seeing yourself as a small, isolated being in a vast, indifferent universe, you begin to recognize yourself as a perfect reflection of universal principles operating at the human scale. Your personal challenges are not unique burdens, but localized expressions of the same forces that shape nations and move stars. The practical implications of this understanding are profound. If your outer circumstances reflect your inner state, then by changing your inner state, you necessarily change your outer circumstances. This is not wishful thinking, but the recognition of how a connected universe actually operates. When you change the cause within, the effects without must change to maintain the correspondence. This principle also explains why certain people, places, and opportunities seem to be drawn into your life at precisely the right moments. In a universe where everything is connected, there are no true accidents or coincidences. What appears as chance or luck is simply the visible manifestation of invisible connections that have been building over time. Your focused attention and sincere desire create resonances that attract corresponding opportunities and relationships. Understanding connection also reveals the responsibility that comes with consciousness. Since your mental and emotional states influence the invisible web that connects all things, you bear a responsibility, not just for your own well-being, but for the well-being of the whole. Your inner peace contributes to peace in the world. Your inner turmoil contributes to turmoil in the world. This is not metaphysical speculation, but the inevitable result of living in a connected universe. The ancient masters developed extraordinary abilities by learning to consciously work with these connections. They understood that by achieving a particular state of consciousness, they could influence distant events and people who were vibrationally attuned to that state. They learned to send healing across vast distances, to influence the weather through inner harmony, to attract abundance by embodying the consciousness of abundance. These abilities may sound fantastic to modern minds, but they are simply the natural result of understanding and applying the principle of connection. When you truly realize that consciousness is the fundamental reality, and that all apparent separation is illusion, you begin to discover that the boundaries you thought were fixed are actually fluid, that the limitations you accepted as permanent are actually temporary, and that possibilities you dismissed as impossible are actually natural. The key to working with connection lies in understanding resonance. Just as a tuning fork struck in one part of a room will cause another tuning fork of the same frequency to vibrate in sympathy, your consciousness naturally resonates with and attracts experiences that match its dominant frequency. By learning to consciously tune your inner state, you learn to attract experiences that correspond to that state. This is why the masters emphasize the importance of cultivating positive emotions clear thinking, and noble aspirations. Not because these states are morally superior, but because they resonate with and attract positive experiences. When your inner state is characterized by love, gratitude, and confidence, you naturally draw toward yourself people and situations that reflect these qualities. When your inner state is dominated by fear, anger, and doubt, you just as naturally attract experiences that correspond to these frequencies. The art lies in learning to maintain your desired inner state regardless of outer circumstances. This requires understanding that you are not the victim of your environment, but the creator of your experience through the quality of consciousness you maintain. When you master this understanding, you discover that you have far more influence over your life than you ever imagined possible. The great mental universe. In the deepest traditions of wisdom, there exists a teaching so fundamental that it underlies every other spiritual and philosophical insight. Yet it is also so simple that the mind often overlooks it in search of something more complex. This teaching is the recognition that everything you have ever experienced, everything you are experiencing now, and everything you will ever experience occurs within consciousness. Think about this carefully. Where do you experience the world? Is it outside of you, independent of your awareness, or is it within the field of your consciousness? When you see a tree, where does the seeing occur? When you hear music, where does the hearing take place? When you touch something soft, where is that softness experienced? Every sensation, every thought, every emotion, every memory arises within the space of your awareness. This is not philosophical speculation, but direct observation. You have never experienced anything outside of consciousness, nor could you. Even your sense of having a body, of being located in space and time, of being separate from the world around you, all of these arise as experiences within awareness. Consciousness is not something you have, it is what you are. It is the very ground of your being, the unchanging background against which all experiences appear and disappear. When this understanding truly dawns, it revolutionizes everything. You realize that what you call the material world is actually a mental phenomenon, patterns of experience arising within the infinite field of consciousness. This does not mean that the world is unreal or that physical objects do not exist. Rather, it means that what you call physical objects are actually structures within consciousness, patterns of experience that appear solid and separate, but are actually modifications of the one substance from which everything is made. This recognition immediately transforms your relationship to your experiences. Instead of seeing yourself as a small, vulnerable being trapped in a hostile material world, you begin to recognize yourself as the very consciousness within which the entire world appears. Your true nature is not the body or the personality, but the aware presence that knows both body and personality as temporary appearances within itself. This shift in identity brings tremendous freedom. When you identify with the small self, you are subject to all the limitations and vulnerabilities that go with being a separate individual. When you recognize your true nature as consciousness itself, you discover that you are actually the ground of all experience, the unchanging witness of all change, the eternal presence within which all temporary forms arise and pass away. The practical implications of this understanding are profound. If the world is fundamentally mental in nature, then the principles that govern mind also govern reality. Mental principles like attention, intention, belief, and imagination become not just psychological phenomena, but creative forces that literally shape the world of experience. This is why the ancient masters focused so intensively on mental training. They understood that mind is not just something that happens in the brain, but the very substance from which all experience is woven. By mastering the movements of mind, they learned to master the movements of reality itself. By achieving one-pointed concentration, they could focus the creative power of consciousness with laser-like intensity. By purifying their intentions, they align themselves with the deeper currents of universal will. Understanding the mental nature of reality also explains why visualization, affirmation, and other mental practices can have tangible effects in the world. These are not mere psychological exercises, but techniques for working directly with the substance of experience. When you visualize clearly and consistently, you're not just imagining something, you are creating a pattern in consciousness that has the same fundamental nature as any other experience. The key to effective mental work lies in understanding the difference between forced imagination and natural creation. When you try to force your mind to create through willpower alone, you're working against the natural flow of consciousness. But when you learn to align your personal will with the deeper intelligence of consciousness itself, you discover that creation becomes effortless and natural. This alignment requires a paradoxical combination of effort and surrender. You must be clear about what you want to create, focused in your visualization, and consistent in your practice. Yet you must also be willing to let go of attachment to specific outcomes and trust the intelligence of consciousness to manifest your intentions in ways that serve the highest good. The mental nature of reality also reveals why belief is so powerful. Beliefs are not just opinions about reality. They are the very structures that determine what reality you experience. When you truly believe something is possible, you create space within consciousness for that possibility to manifest. When you believe something is impossible, you contract consciousness in ways that prevent that possibility from entering your experience. This understanding places tremendous responsibility on your shoulders. Every thought becomes a creative act. Every belief a boundary that defines your world. Every emotion a force that attracts corresponding experiences. You can no longer afford to be casual about what goes with you on in your mind, because mind is not private but creative, not separate from the world, but the very substance from which your world is made. Yet, this responsibility also brings tremendous power. When you understand that consciousness is primary and matter is secondary, that mind shapes reality rather than reality shaping mind, you realize that you have far more influence over your life than you ever imagined. You are not the victim of circumstances, but the creator of experience through the quality of consciousness you maintain. The laboratory of transformation. Knowledge without application is like a map that remains folded in a drawer, while the traveler wanders lost through unfamiliar territory. The principles we have explored together are not meant to remain as intellectual concepts, but to become living practices that transform your daily experience. The real laboratory for this work is not some distant temple or hidden sanctuary, but the ordinary moments of your everyday life. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to practice the principle of unity, recognizing the same consciousness looking out through different eyes. Every challenge becomes a chance to work with polarity, finding the gift hidden within apparent obstacles. Every success and failure becomes a lesson in rhythm, teaching you to dance with natural cycles rather than resist them. Every thought and feeling becomes an experiment in the creative power of consciousness. The transformation that comes from applying these principles is not dramatic or sudden, like the special effects in adventure stories. It is more like the gradual brightening of the sky at dawn, so gentle that you hardly notice it happening until suddenly the world is illuminated in ways that seemed impossible in the darkness. Old patterns of thinking and reacting begin to loosen their grip. Situations that once triggered automatic responses start to offer space for conscious choice. Relationships deepen as you learn to see beyond surface appearances to the consciousness that animates every person you encounter. This process requires patience with yourself and with the natural timing of growth. Seeds planted in consciousness, like seeds planted in soil, require time to germinate and mature. The changes may not be immediately visible on the surface, but deep underground, powerful transformations are taking place. Trust the process, even when you cannot yet see the results. The practice begins with observation. Start to notice the patterns in your own thinking and feeling. Watch how your moods rise and fall in natural rhythms. Observe how your external circumstances seem to mirror your internal states. Pay attention to the connections between your thoughts and your experiences. This observation is not judgment or criticism, but scientific curiosity about how consciousness operates in your particular case. As you become more aware of these patterns, you naturally develop greater choice about how to respond to them. When you notice fear arising, instead of being overwhelmed by it, you can recognize it as energy that can be transmuted into excitement or courage. When you observe yourself falling into negative thinking patterns, instead of fighting them, you can gently redirect your attention toward thoughts that serve your highest good. The key to all this work lies in remembering that you are not trying to control life from the position of a separate self, struggling against hostile forces. You are learning to align your individual consciousness with the universal consciousness of which it is a part. This alignment happens not through force, but through relaxation into what is already true. You are already connected to everything. You are already part of the creative power of the universe. You are already the consciousness within which all experience arises. The challenge is simply remembering this truth consistently, especially in the midst of circumstances that seem to contradict it. This remembering is not a mental exercise, but a return to your natural state, It is like a river remembering its source, or a wave remembering the ocean of which it is a part. As this remembering becomes more natural and consistent, you discover that life begins to flow with a different quality. Synchronicities become more common. Opportunities appear just when they're needed. Relationships become more harmonious. Creative projects unfold with surprising ease. This is not because you are manipulating the universe through spiritual techniques, but because you are remembering how to cooperate with the intelligence that was always present but temporarily forgotten. And then the first time we discover, we lead to a pinnacle dashboard.
The ultimate fruit of this work is not the attainment of special powers or the fulfillment of personal desires, though these may naturally occur along the way. The ultimate fruit is the peace that comes from knowing who you really are, the joy that comes from living in harmony with universal principles, and a love that flows naturally when the illusion of separation dissolves. This peace is not dependent on external circumstances. This joy does not require specific conditions to be present. This love is not limited to particular people or situations. They are qualities of your essential nature, temporarily obscured by identification with the small self, but always available when you remember the truth of what you are. The journey of awakening to this truth is both the simplest thing in the world and the most challenging. Simple, because it requires nothing more than recognizing what is already present. Challenging, because it requires releasing the habits of thought and identification that keep this recognition hidden. Yet every step along this path brings its own rewards, its own discoveries, its own moments of wonder at the incredible intelligence and beauty of existence. You are not separate from the mystery you seek to understand. You are not outside the universe looking in, but inside the universe looking out. You are not a small part trying to comprehend a vast whole, but the whole experiencing itself through a particular point of view. When this understanding moves from concept to living reality, everything changes, and yet nothing changes. The world remains the same world, but you see it with new eyes. You remain the same person, but you know yourself as infinitely more than you imagined. This is the ancient art of mental mastery, not as domination over external forces, but as the recognition of your true relationship to the creative power of existence. It is mastery in the deepest sense, the mastery that comes from understanding, from alignment, from remembering who you really are and how the universe actually works. This mastery is your birthright, your natural inheritance as a conscious being. It has always been yours, waiting patiently for you to claim it through understanding and practice. The principles themselves are timeless, but their application is uniquely yours. No one else can walk your particular path of awakening, just as no one else can live your particular life. Yet, the same universal laws that have guided seekers throughout history are available to guide you now. The same consciousness that has expressed itself through all the great teachers and wisdom traditions is the very consciousness that you are. The invitation is always present, in every moment, in every breath, in every choice. Will you identify with the small self that seems separate and limited, or will you remember the vast self that is your true nature? Will you react from old patterns of conditioning, or will you respond from the wisdom that understands how consciousness creates experience? Will you live as though you are at the mercy of external forces, or will you remember that you are an expression of the very power that moves the stars and grows the flowers? These are not one-time decisions, but moment-by-moment choices that gradually shift the entire trajectory of your experience. Each time you choose wisdom over reaction, unity over separation, love over fear, you strengthen the neural pathways of awakening and weaken the habits that keep you bound to limitation. The work is never finished because consciousness is infinitely creative and there are always new depths to explore, new applications to discover, new levels of mastery to embody. Yet the work is also already complete because what you seek to become, you already are. This paradox is itself one of the deepest teachings, pointing to the mystery of existence that can be lived but never fully grasped by the thinking mind. Let these words be not conclusions, but beginnings, not final answers, but invitations to explore. The real teaching happens in the laboratory of your own experience as you apply these principles to the unique circumstances of your life and discover for yourself their transformative power. The ancient masters can point the way, but you must walk the path. They can share the map, but you must make the journey. And what a journey it is, this exploration of consciousness and its creative potential. Every day brings new opportunities to practice, new challenges that call forth greater wisdom, new moments of recognition when the veils of illusion momentarily part and you glimpse the incredible beauty and intelligence of existence. This is the greatest adventure possible, the adventure of awakening to who you really are and what you are truly capable of creating. The principles are simple, but their implications are infinite. The path is clear, but each step reveals new vistas. The destination is certain, but the journey is endlessly fascinating. You are both the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer, the student and the teacher. In remembering this, you step into the ancient tradition of those who have discovered the art of mental mastery and learn to live as conscious creators in an infinitely creative universe. Welcome to the greatest adventure of all, the adventure of coming home to yourself.